Matzinger, and I'm highly allergic to surface conversations. So let's dig deep. Together, we'll explore creating meaningful habits, deepening our relationships, and cultivating more hope for a better inner and outer life. This is the PS We Expire podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
I learned from the psychologist, I think she's at the University of California at Berkeley. Her name's Allison, and she studies infants and children. And one of the things I learned from her is that babies are born with what she calls a lantern consciousness. So they perceive everything. They have very, very few perceptual filters. And so they just take in everything. It's why they're easily overwhelmed. It's why they have to sleep so much. One of the reasons they have to sleep so much. But they are taking in their environment, drinking it in, absorbing it. As they grow, Allison Gopnik tells us that our consciousness narrows, it refines. Our brains develop all of these perceptual filters that filter out information and allow us to focus. So children, there's a biological reason for why kids are bad at focusing. There's a biological reason for why they're bad at putting on their shoes and remembering to put everything in their backpacks and get out the door on time. And the reason that they're bad at it is because of that lantern consciousness. But we have a spotlight consciousness. Mature brains have a spotlight consciousness, and it allows us to focus because of these perceptual filters. We can focus on a task and get our shoes on, put everything in the backpack, remember all the forms, and get out the door on time. We're really great at that. The good news about that is we can get out the door on time. The bad news is that we are susceptible to focusing on one thing that is an irritant, whether that's an argument that we're replaying in our minds again and again, whether it's something that's going on in a relationship, in politics, with the weather. Kids will go outside in all weathers and play as if the weather doesn't bother them, and it's because it really doesn't. It's just one bit of information amidst millions of bits of information, whereas grown-ups will not go outside because of the weather, because they know they will be unable to think about anything but how hot they are or how cold they are. And so we're susceptible to making ourselves miserable. So it's good to remember that the world is wider than this brain would have me believe. It's full of all kinds of great things if I just widen my perceptual field.
That makes me think of like widening the aperture on a lens. You're able to take in so much more information when you can widen that. And it's interesting that along this being aware of where we're putting our focus, there's also really tangible realities like our phones. We have these small screens that also influence how we think small. So there's some great recommendations about making sure that you're looking up from your tiny box into a wider field of vision because of what it does for your brain. It's it wakes it up to the reality that life isn't quite so narrow and tiny as our brains would make us believe when we're staring at these tiny little screens all the time.
Oh my gosh, Morgan, you're so right. Martha Beck, my teacher and life coach. She's not my life coach, but she is a life coach. She calls the phone the tiny box that tells you bad news. And she reminds us that literally widening your focus, softening your gaze. So the act of focusing your eyes on something small, like a phone or something even smaller like text on a phone, that narrowing of focus is actually activating to the nervous system. Like it will activate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, and the you can undo that. It's one of the reasons, I think, she didn't say this, but I just made the leap. I think it's one of the reasons that it's a not recommended to teach children to read quite so early as we do
Hmm.
nowadays, um, because it's, when if not every kid is ready to start school when grown-ups are ready for the kid to start school. It's kind of it's not kind of, it is an unnatural environment. It's highly structured. There's a whole lot of kids there. It's highly structured and highly stimulating, and it's too much for their little nervous systems to be forced to focus. And now, on top of all that focusing on staying in line and paying attention to the teacher and not touching your friends, you have to now narrow your focus even more onto these little words and even letters. And I think it's no wonder that kids struggle. A lot of kids struggle in early school years. But anyway, one thing we can do is literally focus. I'm doing it right now. Focus in our peripheral vision.
Hmm.
And what that does is it softens our gaze. It prompts the body to relax and prompts the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest and connect system of ours. So you're so right that these phones just narrow
Hmm.
us down, and it is, we must consciously widen.
I so I like that you're drawing it back to the fact that like we can have we need to have, it is imperative that we have conscious involvement in filtering what we're paying attention to. So we get to choose that if we are looking at this little box,
Mm-hmm.
to make a concerted effort to make sure that what we're seeing on there isn't further stimulating our sympathetic nervous system into a fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have to be looking at a small thing, let it be something that is bringing your parasympathetic, your rest and digest, along with what's physiologically happening to you as you're looking at a small thing. And so what I think what we could talk about next is like, how exactly do we pay attention to what we're paying attention to? What are some really practical ways? You already gave us one just by, and I was doing this with you. I'm looking at my computer screen and I'm also then suddenly aware of my window, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a field out there and I'm seeing pictures of my family over here on my bookshelf, and I can feel my body like oh yeah, like there's a lot of other things happening outside of just this thing that I'm looking at right
Mm-hmm.
now. So what would you suggest are some maybe additional tools or ways that we can not only widen our field but also to become much more consciously aware of the things that we are focusing on?
Mm-hmm. So I start with what you referred to in that question, which is what you felt in your body. You said when you widened your perceptual field, you felt your body, you felt the change in your body. And so I think probably the best thing that anyone can do for their wellness, their overall wellness, is to become aware of what's happening in their body. Become aware when you're holding your breath. Become aware of when your shoulders are drying up, or you're feeling tense, or you're making a face.
Hmm.
Um, and stop it. So when you notice this, do something different.
Mm,
This morning I was looking at my phone, reading news. I think it is a good idea to stay informed, but I did stop when I noticed that those things that I mentioned, those are my tells. I don't breathe. I notice that I'm sort of sipping at breath, and I'm tense in my shoulders, and I'm just feeling agitated. So just noticing when I'm tense, and then stopping what I'm doing, or making a decision. Okay, I'm just going to finish reading this article, and then I'm done until, whatever time. So noticing your physiology. And then I also have a daily practice of deep breathing, which is toning to the vagus nerve, which, so the vagus nerve is, um, the the nerve that is either it's responsible for your state of arousal. So if you're in parasympathetic nervous system arousal, which is, the rest and digest and connect, or sympathetic nervous system arousal, which is the fight or flight. So it's very easy as a grown up in this culture. I don't know exactly when it all started, but it's very easy to be in sympathetic nervous system activation. It happens so fast. And the thing about the vagus nerve is that, it is getting exercise. When you are in sympathetic nervous system activation, you are strengthening that response. You
mm,
can also strengthen the parasympathetic nervous system response. Just as you strengthen sympathetic nervous system response with use, you can strengthen parasympathetic nervous system with use. So, deep breathing and relaxation of the muscles go hand in hand. And that is one way to tone your vagus nerve for parasympathetic nervous system activation. So the more time you spend in parasympathetic nervous system activation, the more you are in calm, the more you can be clear headed, the more you can choose consciously and prioritize what you want to prioritize in your life, instead of having your attention hijacked
mm.
just by every squirrel.
Yeah. I love that advice, to be paying attention to what's actually happening in your body, and what you refer to as, when you're noticing the shallow breathing and the little sips of air. There was actually a study done on this, and they dubbed it email apnea. So that when they said, when you're checking your email, you're anticipating
Yeah.
what's the next thing going on. And as we think about, even just like, this is why I love studying neuroscience so much, is that as soon as I can understand what the normal responses that my body has to stimuli, the more I can interrupt some of those things that are not helpful to me. So
Yes.
if we're thinking about just from a purely evolutionary perspective, we are wired to watch for movement, for motion, for change,
Mm-hmm.
for novelty, for something that's unexpected and surprising.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about when you're checking your email, it is like rife with unpredictability, because you don't know who's going to be emailing you. You don't know what they're going to be saying in the email. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know if it's a sales email or something that you need to pay attention to. And so you're already primed for being in a sympathetic nervous system state
Mm-hmm.
by just the activity of checking your email. And then I would say too that this is exactly what happens when we're scrolling on social media too. It's like you hold your breath because your brain is ready
Mm-hmm.
to look for danger. It's ready to look for novelty or unpredictability. And that's what also then makes some of these neurotransmitters fire, because it's getting you ready for what is unpredictable. And
Right.
so if we're just always bringing in these activities that are not allowing us to like take a breath and relax because we know we're safe,
Mm-hmm.
of course we're going to be in this heightened state of arousal, which leads to chronic stress, which leads to all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
the email apnea, that's a real thing. What
Can I
what
just
I wanted,
can I say one
yes,
thing about
please,
that? I
please.
love email apnea, but I actually know the person who worked with the person who created infinite scroll in social media. Have you
Mm,
ever like noticed that social media doesn't end? You just scroll and you scroll and you scroll. And so that also creates a breathlessness. Like you're waiting for there to be an end to this, and there's not an end. So,
mm-hmm.
or not a natural end to social media. Um, and so I would say there's probably an apnea associated with that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So something that a question that came up is, okay, so we're in these environments where we're stimulated all the time, and then we have these feelings that come alongside in
Mm-hmm.
tandem with our physiological responses to things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes our knee-jerk reaction is, how do I change what's happening out here
Mm-hmm.
to alleviate these physical symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
these physiological symptoms? And I think a lot of, the work that I do is trying to train people how to be with what they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
and not jump to, how do I change things out here, but let the first step be, how do I get myself into a calm state?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So yeah, so what do you recommend that people do with all the big feelings?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Morgan, that feelings come to be felt. Um, Feelings that
Hmm.
are suppressed they'll come out sideways, or they will sort of compound, and then they'll explode. So, one thing that I think is helpful to me to remember is something I learned from Jill Bolte Taylor, who I know you know, um, from I think it was her book, My Stroke of Insight. But she taught me that emotions, um, the the neurotransmitters or hormones, I can't remember the neurobiology of it, but whatever, your emotions have a physical effect in your body, and they run their course in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. So if you can feel a feeling and not intensify it by telling a story about it, if you can allow yourself to feel a feeling and just watch it crest and then subside, it's just going to be 90 seconds. And most of us can do anything for 90 seconds.
Hmm.
But yeah, feelings come to be felt. They don't come to stay. They don't come to torture. They come to be felt.
I really, really like that quote a lot. Okay, so one of the things that you just said that is a very practical and logical next step in this line of questioning is, you said not to intensify the feelings with stories.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about that?
Yes. So we are storytellers. There's a large brain network in our brains. I'm sure you know about it. Called the default mode network. And the default mode network's job is to tell the story of me. It is always telling. It's my inner spin doctor that is always reinforcing um, the story of of who I am and why things are happening. So it's trying to make sense of events and my place in them. And it will lie. Not consciously, of course, but it will tell stories that are not based in reality. So, for example, when my daughter had her first boyfriend, she's 22 now, but she was just about to turn 16, and it was a pretty intense relationship. And it was very disorienting for me, for her to, one day be sort of a little girl, and then the next day be in love with a boy, and sort of go from being with me most of the time to hardly ever with me, or wanting to be with him. And so I was sad and struggling about that. Happy for her, because being in love is really fun, but also mourning what I had suddenly lost, according to me. That was my story. And so what I remember in those days was noticing her behavior and interpreting it. I'd have a feeling, and I would interpret that feeling along the lines of, she doesn't respect me, she's growing up too fast, I've lost her, it's over. Yeah, so I would tell these catastrophic stories, because what I was looking at was, what was happening was creating feelings inside of me that were uncomfortable. And my default mode network was telling a story of injury. She is hurting me. She is injuring me with this behavior. And so I became, in that season of life, very, very mindful of the stories I was telling. And one of the reasons that I was so motivated to be mindful of the stories I was telling was I wanted that relationship with her. And it was changing, whether I liked it or not. And so it was incumbent on me to change with it, to evolve with it, to respond instead of react to it, because my relationship with her was so important to me. But that is just one example of the ways that we feel feelings. We see things, we have feelings about them, and then we will interpret them through a story. And if that story, what I notice, because I pay really close attention to how I feel in the body, if that story makes me breathless and tense, I question it. If it if it is a story that helps me to feel relaxed and empowered and clear thinking, then I'll go with it.
I thank you for sharing that. I really like this idea of recognizing when we're responding from a place of injury
Mm-hmm.
or whether we're responding from a place of calm. I went on a ride yesterday and was riding by the bay. So I live on the coast, and we have, beautiful, I wouldn't say beaches, beautiful coastline.
Mm-hmm.
And I was riding by the bay, and I stopped because the sun was setting, and it just was, it was very a choppy bay, and so it looked like brush strokes. It looked like a painting. It was so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was sitting there looking at this and noticing the reflection of the clouds and the sun in the water, it struck me that you really only have a clear, really clear reflection when the water is calm. And so it just struck me as this like really beautiful metaphor of, if I want to have a clear inner reflection of an outer reality, it's required that I'm calm in order to reflect it accurately. And so I like to think of, these stories that our brain offers us as either like brush strokes or waves,
Mm-hmm.
where it's saying, I think my metaphor is about to break down, so I'll deviate from that for a second, but that the stories that our brain comes up with are very historical.
Mm-hmm.
So they're always based on what has happened as a way to predict what's going to happen. And I imagine that as you're feeling these feelings come up in response to this beautiful evolutionary development with your daughter, this a very necessary and normal stage in development, that the stories are coming up from somewhere.
Mhm.
And that so often we move through life not really understanding that our stories typically will come that have been laid down in the first,
Mhm.
decade of our lives.
Mhm.
And
Gosh, yeah.
I'm curious about, I mean, you already mentioned that you're a very mindful person when it comes to noticing how your body is responding to things. But I'm really wondering, for people that maybe are just now becoming interested in tools or practices that help them do that, like how do we recognize when we're telling stories, and like you said, like our brains will lie to us, and it's never it's always in an attempt to protect us and to do
Yes.
something good for us. So
Mhm.
it's never a lie that's like an intentional manipulation, but
Mhm.
it just doesn't know.
Right.
And so for someone who's like, how do I detect if my brain is telling me stories, or how do I step outside of the story enough to like be the watcher of my
Mhm.
thoughts? How do you recommend people start to do that?
Mm. Such a great question. So, this capacity or this drive to tell stories of the brain um, has been witnessed. I'm sure you know this by neuroscientific studies. Um, some I don't remember specifically uh, the different, the details of different studies, but what I do know is that they come from people studying people who have had strokes or some kind of impairment to a specific part of the brain. Um, that um, so the researcher will, shows the research, has the research subject cover one eye, and so one half of the brain sees a picture and then is instructed to draw a picture, and then the person draws a picture of the thing that they saw, and then the picture goes away, and now they don't know what the picture is anymore. And the researcher says, why did you draw a chicken? Why did you draw a chicken? And that default mode network storyteller says, well, oh, it's because I'm hungry. It's lunchtime. So um, we are in some ways strangers to ourselves. But
Hmm.
the only thing that never tells a lie is the body. The body knows when it's suffering, when there's, and what creates suffering is a story that is a story that the brain is telling. And so the story will create the sensations in the body that we can notice. And so I reiterate that the most important thing that people can do is to um, pay attention to the signals of their bodies. And then once they do that, this is what I do. This is what I learned in life coach training and from the work of Byron Katie. What I learned to do is first notice the sensations of my body. And then I just ask a question: what's going on here?
Hmm.
Another question I might ask is, what am I thinking and believing in this moment? And then I will have my story. And once I have my story, I can ask myself, and this is the first question of the work of Byron Katie. The first question is it true? And for me, that is often enough to soften me. Sometimes it is not enough to soften me. Sometimes I go, hell yes, it's true. But but that's what happens. I'm sure you noticed I got all tense, and my voice was, strong and projecting and aggressive. And so then I ask the second question of the work, which is, can I absolutely know that that's true? That story I'm telling, can I be certain of it? Another way that I ask that question is, really? Just
Hmm.
like, are you sure that that's true? Can you be certain? Is your belief in that story worth what you're doing to yourself? And then what you're going to do to the next person you encounter? Is it worth the preoccupation? Is it worth losing clarity? Is it worth um, is it just, do you really want to hold on to a story that's hurting you, that I guarantee you cannot be certain that that's the only way to see it? That's the only interpretation. So so noticing, and then eliciting this story by asking, what's going on here? And then thirdly, questioning if this story is really true
Hmm.
with 100% certainty. And, once you start asking that question, once you start noticing your body, and then you start investigating your stories, life becomes, I think, more fluid.
It sounds to me like Byron Katie's questions make you think in a lantern consciousness way. It's like pulls off the blinders
Mhm.
there and lets you start to imagine it differently.
Yes.
What I like about the sequence that you're suggesting is that we don't go straight to the line of questioning about, is this true, because then we can just gaslight ourselves, like
Mm-hmm.
first feel in the body what you're feeling,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
pay attention to that, sit with that, because it's kind of the same thing as, like when my kids were younger and they would have a tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
If I tried to just sit and calmly tell me what's wrong, like why,
Mm-hmm.
and try and logic with them, like it literally doesn't work. Like I have to be able to sit with them for the
Mm-hmm.
90 seconds or however long it is for a toddler. Usually
Yeah.
not 90 seconds, but I have to be able to sit with that,
Mm-hmm.
to let the emotions cycle through and let our feelings do what feelings do
Mm-hmm.
before I jump into this line of questioning. And what I thought of immediately is that, like you said, like with that first question, is this true? To feel the resistance in ourselves to saying no or maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I think a lot of people who um, maybe are resistant to doing like mindful work or asking some of these questions is this idea of, if I don't have my anger,
Mm-hmm.
if I don't have my fear, if I don't have my rage, if I don't have my sadness, if I don't have my grief,
Mm-hmm.
then there's a worry somehow that then I will maybe lose part of myself. I will not have the motivation needed to do the things that I need to do. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, people who are very interested in like social justice work,
Yeah.
if I don't have my anger, then I will not be as effective or as motivated to
Mm-hmm.
do this social justice work. And for myself, I've found that the more calm I can be and the more centered I can be and not motivated by things that like don't feel good in my own body, the more effective I am, which doesn't feel true, but I mean, that's what I'm seeing in my own experience.
Um, I have the same experience as you do. My experience with anger is, um, it's similar to fear in that it's highly motivating, but for short bursts.
Hmm.
It's not meant to be sustained. when it is sustained, it exhausts you. It uses you up. So fear and anger, I suppose they have their place. I think there's been some mission creep there. And I think that we've come to associate fear and anger as motivators in certain sectors of life where action is required. And yet there are other areas of life where we're very active over a long period of time, very effective and productive without anger and fear. In fact, we're motivated by love. And I'm thinking primarily about raising children. Do I, when my infant wakes in the night and is crying, do I need to be angry to go get her? No, the better way I may be angry for a second or a few or minutes altogether, if I'm honest, but the better motivator is love. And I know this because if I pick her up in anger, she's going to cry more. So I love what Martin Luther King said. He may have been quoting someone else, I don't know, but I attribute this to him. What are you putting in circulation? If, as an activist, I believe that I'm motivated by anger, then I'm putting anger in circulation. And we know what that looks like. It looks like war. But as a parent, I know I can see in this little dyad I have with my child that when I put anger into circulation, she's afraid. And then she's tense and she cries more and becomes needier and clingier. Whereas when I put love in circulation in our little dyad, she can relax and then I can relax. And now love is moving and we can both be curious and clear and just live our lives. And so I think that we just haven't given love a fair shot in other areas of life outside of parenting where sustained action is required.
It's unfortunate to see the byproducts of being so tethered to an environment online that profits from fear and anger. So going back to just how we're wired to notice threats first.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody hasn't watched The Social Dilemma, I mean, watch it.
Yeah.
Because we can understand more that these algorithms have been I wouldn't say motivated, but have been programmed to keep people on the platform as long as possible. And people know that we are wired to notice threats and danger and fear and anger more than anything else. And so that's what we're going to see because that's what's profitable for these companies.
Yeah.
And so I really, really like that phrase mission creep. I think that's a really great kind of little kind of question to have in my back pocket. Like, is this mission creep right now? What would you suggest to I'm gonna just get myself a little session right now. When the feeling is hopelessness or despair. So this, I think, is probably one of the areas where I struggle the most in some areas of my life where it's like I really can't see how things are going to be different. and feel helpless to change
Mm-hmm.
some things. And so it almost is just this, I don't know, like the visual that just popped up for me is like when you're steeping a tea bag,
Mm-hmm.
and the tea is just seeping into all like the full cup, and
Mm-hmm.
it can feel like despair mission creep, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
like the despair is just like kind of permeating everything, even things that don't seem to be connected to that original thing that feels hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how do you
Yeah.
what do you do with that?
Well, are you willing to be coached for just a minute?
Yes. She says with trepidation.
Well, I would just invite you to close your eyes if you're willing and just take a moment to feel your body. Take a moment to relax your body from your face to your shoulders, to your belly, to your pelvic floor, and to feel yourself supported in your environment by the floor and the chair. And just allow your body to relax. And notice your breathing. You don't have to breathe any particular way, just notice it. And then notice the sensory details of your environment, the sounds, the smells. And even though your eyes are closed, your visual field still sees lights and shadows. So you're just remembering that you are a body. And so, Morgan, I invite you to go to a moment, just one moment, when you were feeling despair and hopelessness. Just identify this moment in your imagination, in your mind. And how does despair and hopelessness feel in your body in this moment?
Feels like tightness in my throat.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a heavy, this isn't going to make any sense, but it doesn't matter. It's like, it feels like a heavy mist
Mm-hmm.
in my belly.
Yeah, thank you. And so when you're feeling these physical sensations and these emotions, what do you do? Like if I were a fly on the wall, what would I see if I looked at you?
Mm. Well, it depends on the day. It
Well, I'm
depends on
asking you
how,
just for this,
yeah,
just in
just for,
this one
okay.
moment.
Hmm. I don't think you would see anything because it feels like everything goes in. So even if I felt a compulsion to cry, I would just
Mm-hmm.
suck it all in.
Mm-hmm. So you feel terrible and you do nothing.
Mm.
Does that solve the problem? Does that make the hopelessness or despair go away?
No,
Okay.
no.
All right, Morgan. So in this same exact moment, who would you be without the thought that it's hopeless? Same exact moment, but the thought it's hopeless is just not possible for you. What would you feel in your body? What emotion would you experience in this moment without the thought it's hopeless?
It feels like, okay, the label is courage, but the sensation is um, energy coming up through my feet
Mm-hmm.
and like making its way up
Yeah.
all the way up my body.
Mm-hmm. And with that energy, what could you do?
There's movement. I feel the tears coming
Mm-hmm.
and the words coming.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So movement is possible.
Hmm.
So thank you, Morgan. You can open your eyes. So we see that this thought, while an argument could be made for it, but it's not an argument you want to win because it shuts down action.
Mm-hmm.
And so why don't we make an argument that it's not hopeless? How that's, that is the next step, is to create specific, tell a new story, one that works with you, with this energy, so that you can take action. Specific, believable evidence that it's not hopeless. And you don't have to give it now, but that's really the next step. Is, if you're going to tell a story, which you are, it's what we do, tell a good one. Tell one that is empowering instead of paralyzing.
I have two follow-up questions, but first, thank you for inviting me into that experience. That was, I think what's really wonderful about this type of exercise is it's not only a simple intellectual memory of this conversation. It's something that will so easily be recalled because I will remember the feeling in my body.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's that's a really powerful argument for this type of work.
Yes.
But the question I have, and actually it's funny, my I'm already coming up with the answer, but I'll say it anyway because I suspect if this is my question that this is other people's question as well. In those moments, when I'm able to call up a different perspective, a different argument, where I'm able to bring out the lantern instead of the flashlight, if the circumstance that reinforces the story that it's hopeless, if that is a repeated circumstance, it almost I can feel this resistance to hopefulness that it could be different, because if it's a repeated circumstance, then it feels foolish to hope that it could be different. And I guess the answer that's already coming to me is it's in the recognition that something can be different inside me that doesn't make it feel quite so hopeless when the circumstance may come back again.
Yes. Well, yes. Everything starts inside of you, right? Changing other people is hopeless. This way, when we try to manipulate them, when we try to control them, that is hopeless. My hunch is that when people are behaving hatefully, angrily, vengefully, resentfully, they are doing so because they feel hopeless. And some people turn hopelessness on themselves and are pulled down. That's how I tend to respond. But other people tend to respond outwardly, and they act out instead of act in. And so it really is. So if I want them to change, Byron Katie might say, if change is so great, you do it. So if change is so great, if it's so easy, start with yourself. So change in here. And I'll tell you, one thing that I have noticed that has astounded me over and over is that when I change in this way, not in exactly the way that you and I did just a moment ago, just meditating on the consequences of a story, and then meditating on the consequences of who I am without the story. I do this because it really feels like I'm going in the body and then I'm coming out of the body. So it's very, as you experienced yourself, it is very physical. So when I change in here, and I never do this work with an intention to change anything out here, because I know that usually I can't. But what I notice is that when I change in here and I find that energy and that power inside of myself, then the world around me does seem to change. It very often changes. And that is, it's for me an unexpected consequence of doing this work. For example, I was telling you this story about the time when I was adjusting to my daughter growing up. I would do the work on my thoughts and judgments of her, which all of them were variations on the theme of, I want her to want to be with me. Almost immediately and almost every time I did the work on my judgments of her, she would appear beside me and want to be with me. It was kind of like magic. No, it was magic. Sure. I did no manipulation. I just softened my heart and found my power. And in doing that, I became more magnetic to her. And I have found that about my son, my husband, and friends, other relationships that I have. That's where I have power and influence. But only if I relinquish it first. Only if I give up trying to change anyone and change myself first, then this mysterious thing happens, which is that I become magnetic and things change outside of me without any manipulation.
It's funny to think about, okay, I want things to be better in my life, so I'm going to do this now, like as a way to manipulate that. And that also never works. Like it has to be the real work, because
Genuine, yeah.
because otherwise, I mean, people can sense the falseness a mile away.
Oh my God. It's so true. It's so true. And I think this is one of the reasons that people who are spiritual sometimes have a bad rap, because we just can feel in our bodies the insincerity. Like they're saying all the right words, but our bodies say, No, don't like it. Um, when my son was 3, this is how I learned this. When my son was 3, he colored in. We were living in an apartment, and he colored in the grout on the kitchen tiles with crayons.
Oh no.
And I was furious with him for doing that. I thought he knew better. But I was also scared. Like, how was I going to clean this? What were they going to charge me, to do this or to repair this? And so I knew enough to not blame him for it, but I blamed him for it. So
Mm-hmm.
with my mouth words, that's what my kids call them. With my mouth words, I told him to stop it and shook his crayons away from him. And that little 3-year-old, he just looked at me and he said, even though I had said everything, all my words were correct, he said to me, I don't like it when you talk to me like that. And I was like, it just went right to my heart. People feel our authenticity or our fakery in their bodies. And so the work that I do is never, ever just slapping a smiley face on something. It's not ever being false and saying, it's okay, it'll be fine. It must be authentic. And I know there's always a way to find the power inside of me and inside of, the people that I work with. There's always agency and power to be found inside of them. And that's just what we look for. We look for that power source. And because, it's not, we individuals don't have to do everything, but we can always do something. Like a candle in a dark room is not nothing. The room may
Mm-hmm.
still be dark, but the candle is something. And I do think, and it doesn't always go the way we hope with relationships, but our authenticity and telling our truth and finding again and finding again our power and agency, it makes a difference. And it may not make a difference immediately, but I think cumulatively, it does make a difference. And if it doesn't, it's because the other person in the relationship is just not invested. And sometimes relationships do end, and I don't wish that on anyone. But what can we do, Morgan, but be true to ourselves and to give in to hopelessness or despair, while tempting, is, well, it doesn't feel good, really,
Mm.
does it?
Yeah, I really like that story about your son, because I've had this experience with my little guy where I'll be saying something like in a forceful tone, but at like a reasonable decibel, and he'll say, "Don't yell at me."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "I'm not yelling at you," but he's not talking about the volume. He's talking about the energy behind what I'm saying. And like it's so easy for me to get like caught up in like, well, no, it's not technically yelling, instead of like being in the moment and being like, what exactly is he feeling from me right
Yes.
now? And to take the ownership of that. And what I find discouraging, I suppose, about a lot of like self-help or spirituality, or these conversations around consciousness and self-awareness, is that all of a sudden we expect ourselves, like once we've quote unquote mastered some of these tools or techniques or ways of being, that suddenly like we should be able to apply them across all situations and all circumstances, and we should always be in this like calm sea of conscious awareness, so whatever. And like that, I have not found that to be true for myself. And it's very easy for me to then like attach a story to that of like that I'm being false or that I'm
Mhm.
not doing the work if it doesn't suddenly translate into all these different areas of my life.
Right.
And I want to encourage people who are listening that instead of paying attention to what's happening in this narrow field of our history, but to like take the long view of
Mhm.
it and instead say, oh man, I can remember when my 5 years ago when my kids were this age and this is how I responded, and I'm not responding like that anymore.
Mm.
So to take a wider view of our personal history when it comes to when you know things that you wish that you had done earlier but you can't. I remember um, years ago I was in a Facebook group for parents whose children had the same disease that my daughter did. And I remember one mother asking, so one of the things that's really common for kids that have MPS is, bowel issues.
Mhm.
So a lot of doctors will prescribe daily laxatives or stool softeners or whatever to help with this. And so this mom was saying, hey, I've been using Miralax for X amount of days. And it was like dozens of comments beneath that where parents were saying, don't do that. It actually does this for your kid. And like we did that for a while and we realized like it was actually harming him and all this, like all of this, which all of those things probably there was some truth in there.
Mhm.
But I felt so compelled to just leave a comment that said, you did the best you could with what you knew,
Mhm.
and to not apply what you know to be good and right and the best thing for you or your child, which is, like a whole nother layer of feeling responsible and
Mhm.
tied to the outcomes of whatever we're doing, but not to apply what I know now to past experiences. Like that is a real trap.
It sure is. It sure is. And thank God for apologies. I
Mm.
have apologized to my kids for what I knew back then, you know, for not
Right.
knowing back then what I know now.
Mm.
And I've I've been as specific as I can. Like, remember that time when this happened and I responded
Mm.
this way. Oh, I wish I knew then. I wish I had known then what I know now. I would have responded differently, I think. But all of these experiences are the making of us. You know, we we're being made all the time. We're learning all the time if we're paying attention. And I heard Elizabeth Gilbert say, who I think of as someone who is very evolved. I heard her say, I am not skilled enough to deal with every situation and every person all the time.
Mm.
That's what boundaries are for.
Hmm.
And I think one of the boundaries, when I notice that a situation or a dynamic is beyond my skill, one of my boundaries is to remove myself from an argument, remove myself from a situation so that I can process it on my own, so that I can allow myself space to calm down and then time to process. And then I can go back in if I choose to with greater clarity. Um, I had this idea, and I swear it comes from TV and movies, which are scripted, that I should know how to argue intelligently, um, that I should know how to fight smart and win. But
Mm.
I really think that that mostly doesn't happen in life. I think it mostly happens in scripted dramas. Um, I think in real life, it's very messy. Real life is very messy, and I highly, I highly, highly value processing asynchronously. Like, you
Hmm.
know, when I see this is an argument or this situation is way out of control, I I do remove myself and process. And yes, it's true, things happen in my absence and without my participation. It will things will continue happening, but I'm no good in that situation if I'm not clear. If I'm just reactive, I'm not going to add anything positive to the situation, so I remove myself.
What I like about that is that it forces us to define what winning would be. So, for example, I was thinking like the other place where that type of back and forth and quick retorts would exist is when the parameters have been set up that everybody knows this is a debate,
Uh-huh.
and that like there's a really clear definition of what winning is in that debate, and everybody knows their role. So even that is like so scripted. And when we're going into, conversations with people, whether it's in a workplace or in our personal life, the definitions of winning are not clear, and that everybody probably is coming to the circumstance with a different idea of what winning looks like. And if someone's idea of winning is that I said all the good points and the other person didn't have anything intelligent to say back to me,
Mm-hmm.
okay, perhaps they won verbally, but what did that do to the relationship?
Yeah.
Would you really consider that a win
Mm-hmm.
if it ended up damaging the relationship, or whatever? And I think a lot of it has to do with like how good are we at defining for ourselves what our values are, what our preferences are, what we would consider winning. So if I consider a win as me removing myself from a situation in order to preserve the open communication in the relationship in a different kind of de-escalated environment, that's a win. That's not a failure on my part. That's not because I somehow suck at thinking through things logically, or that I'm not a thoughtful person or whatever. It's like it's because we value something else more highly than just that verbal like
Right.
with the other person. Like what a gift for us to turn our consciousness onto what our own beliefs about winning are.
That's such a great point. I love it. I love once again, opening our awareness, broadening our perceptual field to something beyond the words, to the relationship. Also, to how does this feel in my body? How is this probably feeling in their body? Um, doing processing of my judgments and thoughts and feelings about what's happening over here, this thing I remove myself from. What I have in my experience, when I come back in with clarity, well, as I said, very often things have changed for the better as I've been doing my work over here without me having to talk at all. And and my clarity is usually very succinct, and it is something that I feel in my body and they feel in their body as a good feeling. And so,
Hmm.
like with my son, I was communicating correct words, but with a body that was a snarl and a shout. And if I'm doing that in an argument with a grown up, they're going to feel that snarl and shout in their body. And even if they think, oh, she was so smart, I was so dumb, I guess she won. Well, like you point out, um, it's hurt. That win comes at a really high cost to the
Hmm.
relationship and to both our bodies.
I wrote down, uh, going back to this internal story that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So applying this same line of logic of winning to the internal narrative that we have,
Mm-hmm.
you said an argument can be made for it, but it's not an argument you want to win. So if we're, it's interesting to like because I believe that the things that are happening on the macro are because they're happening in the micro. So,
Yes.
I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll say it anyway. One of the greatest predictors of positive health outcome is a diversity in the gut microbiome. When one of the problems with like heavy antibiotic use is that it ends up killing off a lot of the good guys too,
Yeah.
and your body doesn't function as well without this level of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're thinking about this on the micro level, apply this zoomed out a little bit more to our relationships. If we don't have a diversity of conversations, a diversity of ideas, a diversity of ways of viewing the world, like we're really at a deficit.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're, I guess I really did go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but in our own minds, in our own stories that are constantly cropping up in response to the things that we're feeling, I really, really like your point that going back to for myself, like in those feelings, when I'm feeling hopeless or despondent or I'm feeling despair,
Mm-hmm.
I could amass evidence that say, oh, yeah, you're right to feel hopeless. You're right to be in despair. I could win that argument.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, it's not an argument that you want to win. And even just having that knowledge can break the spell a bit. I was dropping my son off at school this morning, and he's never liked going to school. He's in third grade now, and ever since like the first day of kindergarten, he's like, I hate school. So as we're driving to school, he's saying, I hate school. And I try and, be a good place for him to feel how hard school is for him,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the words that he puts to it. But I was pointing out to him that our brains do a really good job of finding evidence for the thing that we're saying or the thing that we're believing. And so
Mm-hmm.
I said, you don't have to say, I love school, and then find all the ways
Mm-hmm.
that you love school. Like that might be way too big of a hard task
Mm-hmm.
right now. So why don't we say, school's not always bad, and just find the evidence that school's not always bad.
Yeah.
Like, can you just pay attention to moments where you don't feel like you don't want to be there? Like,
Mm-hmm.
just can you just find the moments like that, and like bring those stories along with the one that says I hate school,
Mm.
and not as a way to say, Luke, your experience of being at school is stupid, or like, of course you don't hate it all the time, like it's not helpful. But to find a way to like bridge the gap for him,
Mm-hmm.
where it can help him learn the skill of amassing evidence for an intentional belief.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Morgan. Such good momming. Um, when
Thanks.
one thing also that might be helpful is asking like asking him asking him what he's feeling in his body.
Hmm.
Because there's we feel things in our bodies and then the story happens. So he could change what you're talking about is changing the
Mm.
story. But another story that he could tell is, just noticing, oh, I'm feeling, butterflies in my stomach. And that's the thing that usually happens because I don't know what the day's going to bring, you know? So, so taking it even back to, and inviting him just to take it back to the physical sensations and not necessarily telling a story about it at all. I mean, it's, but just noticing the raw sensations without labeling them um, could be helpful.
Oh, for sure. Like that's been super. I mean, I feel like that's something that I've just learned recently,
Yeah.
is how quickly I jump to labeling physical sensations in my body as something. And
Yes.
it's because words can only go so far to describe what's happening in our bodies. And so just
Mhm.
in all life we rely on heuristics, which are just categories to lump our perceptions into. We do
Right.
this with people, we do this with feelings in our bodies, we do this with everything.
Oh, so
And it makes a
true.
lot of sense, but like I so one of the wonderful things practically that people can do is expand their emotional vocabulary. So instead of kind of just sticking to like the 4 or 5 basic ones, to actually feel into some of the subtleties between one emotion and another and find one
Mhm.
that helps you more fine tune the label that you're giving to a particular emotion.
Yes, absolutely. Our concepts shape our realities. Our so, as an example from my own life, when I went through menopause, I had a lot of trouble sleeping, and I had a lot of anxiety. And I'm putting it in air quotes because I'd never had anxiety before, but I was told this is something that people experience during menopause. So the physical sensations of a racing heart and a twisting gut, and unpleasant high arousal in my body, I was labeling as anxiety. And and I just at some point I realized that's not helping me. So what I started doing when I would wake in the night is I first just identified, oh, I am having a hot flash. That's
Mm,
so that wakes me up. And then my body is alarmed at this sudden heating up of itself. And so my heart starts to race. And I have told a story that that racing heart means anxiety. And it also means storytelling. It also means I won't get back to sleep. And it also means if I don't sleep, then I'll be, worthless in the morning. And so I was just telling stories and keeping myself awake. So when I learned that the story, this is anxiety that happens with menopause, when I noticed that story and I noticed it wasn't helping me, I decomposed it. I
mm,
I just said I had a hot flash, which alarmed my body, which made my heart race, and that's okay. And I started talking to myself when that would happen, and I just said, "Baby, it's just a hot flash. You're fine."
mm,
And then I just started focusing rather than and I took energy from my thinking. And I just started focusing on the parts of my body that I knew were still asleep. Because they
mm,
were there. I just had to look for them. So I gave my mind a helpful task to hunt for the parts of my body that were still asleep. And when I found them, they would spread. And they did. And I went right back to sleep. And
mm,
it broke that cycle. Um, that and some hormone replacement was helpful. so
mm.
but there really was a pretty quick turn once I just dismantled that story of anxiety, um, and rewrote it.
I love that. The word that you used that just delighted me and brought this image to my mind was decompose. And I had this like all of a sudden this like idea of um having a funeral for the story. like I visualize like standing at a gravesite and you've got this headstone there that said, "Here lies whatever story. Here lies anxiety." And you're imagining the story in the ground decomposing and like also honoring that story.
Mm,
And you can go visit that story whenever you want to, but it's dead. Like to resurrect it, to resurrect this zombie story, it would be terrifying. And oh my goodness, that visual I think is gonna stick with me for a long time of like just holding a little service for the story and be like, okay, like time for you to decompose.
I love it. It's a great imagery too.
Oh, that's delightful. Oh my goodness. Well, we're coming up on time, but I want to ask if there's like any other closing thoughts, or maybe um, things that are coming to mind that have been most helpful to you, or something that you're feeling really excited about, something that has just like sparked that little light in yourself,
Mm.
um, that
Mm.
you're feeling excited about right now, or something that you feel like would be really helpful for everyone to hear before we go.
Well, this probably isn't excellent marketing, but I just finished um, a manifesting mini course. It was a free class, and it was so much fun. Um, that in 20, so I have a group coaching program called Be the Heroine, as in be the heroine of your life. It's for women who feel stuck in caretaking roles and who want to step more boldly into their own desires and needs and prioritize their what they need and prioritize their ambition and just start making their mark on their own terms. So, so I'm going to enroll a new class of heroines at the end of this month. But there's another class within Be the Heroine. So there's a first year class which I call Foundations, and anyone is eligible to enroll in that. But women who have been in the program for 1 or more years are eligible to enroll in the Evolutions group. So it's the group that evolves year to year. The Foundations group has a set curriculum of all my favorite ideas. So anyone who joins will learn the things that you and I have been talking about today and be implementing them slowly over the course of a year, because I find that that's really time is what we need to change, because we need time because the steps need to be small and they need to be consistent. And so that's why the course takes place over a year. But anyway, I'm really excited about manifesting. And so the Evolutions year is going to be, as I said, it's an evolving curriculum. So it's going to be focused on manifesting, and manifesting not in a way that I think we're used to hearing about it, which is just solely focusing on the positive. It's also about you referred to the first, or early in our conversation, you referred to the first 10 years of life. So
Mm-hmm.
part of the way that I have now learned to do manifesting is to deal head on with those limiting stories from our past. Because if there are things in your life that you want but have chronically not experienced. So usually we're talking about love, relationships, success in your chosen work, money. These are the things that people, tend to have less of than they want. So if you have a chronic gulf between what you want and what you've been getting, it's because there's a part of you that is afraid of it. And it's afraid of it because of something you experienced in childhood, probably a lot of things you experienced in childhood. But you got the message, or you got the story, which was just reinforced over time, because as you pointed out, the mind is excellent at finding evidence for what you already believe. So that's why thoughts tend to calcify into stories, which calcify into beliefs that tend to limit us. Anyway, so the way I do manifesting is as we look straight on at those fears and limiting beliefs, and step by step unravel them so that we can close the gap between where we are and where we want to be. So, so I just did that course. Sorry, but I still am very excited about it, And I'm also perpetually excited by my work with clients, perpetually excited by the curriculum of the foundations group of Be the Heroine. It is just the best of everything that I know as a coach. I've been coaching for 14 years now, and this is the tried and true foundation of um, of my wellness and the well-being of my clients. It's the foundation that has allowed them to create the lives that they want and to be empowered and have agency in their lives. So I'm always excited about that. And if people don't like or are not ready to commit to, well, first of all, Be the Heroine is a group program. So some people are a little bit shy about being in groups, and I respect that. So I do very similar work on a one-to-one basis. So you asked what I'm excited about. I'm excited about manifesting and basically all of the work I do.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that you are excited about the work that you're doing. You know, like there are far too many people that feel meh at best and
Oh,
really feel stuck at worst, you know.
oh my goodness.
Um, and I think in the same way that you were talking about the how settled you are in yourself becomes something that is magnetic to other people. I mean, I can already feel that in the work that you do. You've clearly like spent some time refining
Mm-hmm.
your message and refining the tools that you offer to people because they're working for you, and that's very, very magnetic. So I think I foresee like your program's busting at the seams.
Oh, thank you so much, Morgan. You know, um, I really, when I was in life coach training, Martha Beck, my teacher, she she was teaching us this tool, and we call it the body compass, um, which goes from -10 to +10. So -10 is the worst feeling you've ever felt, and +10 is the best. And so she was asking us, you know, how would you rate the activities of your day? And all of us, we're good girls. We say things like, oh, +7, +8, +6. Oh, that's a +3. That's a -2. We won't do that. But we're going to focus on the positive things. And she said to us, Martha said, +7? Really? Is that all? You deserve +10 lives. You don't settle for less than +10. And at the time, we were all so skeptical. We were like, oh, come on, nobody gets a +10 life. But the longer I do this work, the more I come back to that. And I believe her now. There,
Hmm.
don't settle. If if you think that the best you can get in this life is +3 or +5 or +7, it's not true. It's not true. And you deserve more. And I'm telling you, the brighter you shine, the more you benefit your family and your community. And you have a hell of a lot more fun that way
Hmm.
when you shine brightly. So
I
that's my
love that.
mission.
What a great message to end with. So I will of course link to all of your socials and your website and your program and all of that in the episode notes, so people can find you there. But to all of my listeners, before we go, P.S.